Hi everyone, it's Monday, October 26th at 1 o'clock Eastern Time, and this is Admissions Live. I'm your host, Erin Supinka, and today we're talking about why it's important to conduct audience research to meet enrollment goals. My guests today are Mike Haynes and Bill Hayward, two men with extensive research experience in higher education. I'll bring them on in just a moment to talk about understanding prospective students and parent audience, but first, a big shout out to the folks that make today's show possible. Today's show is made possible by Chegg Enrollment Solutions, helping you save time, save money, and recruit smarter. If you're interested in audience research, be sure to check out Selfie Snapchat So What, the 2015 Socials Admissions Report, the fourth installment of Chegg's annual research of how students use digital, social, and mobile tools throughout their college search. Visit edu.chegg.com for more details. Higher Ed Live is produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Join M. Stoner's co-founder and CEO on November 3rd for a free webinar on digital storytelling. If you're looking for ways to become a better storyteller and extend your reach, don't miss this webinar. We're tweeting out a link where you can learn more and register. Admissions Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network, offering viewers direct access to the best and brightest minds in education. Live webcasts allow viewers to share knowledge and participate in discussions around the most important issues in the industry. All episodes of Admission Live are free and accessible in the video archives at higheredlive.com and in podcast formats on iTunes. And now, introducing our guests, I would like first to introduce Mike Haynes.
Hi, my name is Mike Hannes. I'm a researcher with about 10 plus years of experience. I started off at a Slover Lynette, a research audience planning and research firm, where we focused in higher education as well as arts and culture clients. Since then, I've also worked at a research firm in Manhattan, and then I also worked at a university in New Zealand as a benchmarking analyst. In the last year and a half, I started my own firm where I'm currently doing research for higher education audiences.
Great, and now Bill.
Hi, I have been in higher ed for over 30 years. I spent more than 20 years as an institution researcher, and then in 2009 I joined Slover Lynette with Mike, and we really started what was a pretty small higher ed practice. What was primarily an arts and culture audience research firm. Turned that into a pretty exciting practice over the course of 3 or 4 years. And then it was so successful, in fact, it was acquired by Huron Consulting. And that's where that practice exists today. And I worked there for a while, and now I'm back at a university.
Nice. So I'm just going to dive right into our questions, but before we get started there, for those of you who are watching along, please don't hesitate to ask questions using the hashtag HigherEdLive. It's in my little bio here. I'll do my best to ask questions as they come in. First questions first. What does it mean to be audience-centric?
Well, I think I would define it as using research to understand the motivations and perceptions and behaviors of the constituents you care about, whether that's prospective students, admits, alumni, and so forth.
Yeah, I think that captures it pretty well. I mean, I think, Mike, it's interesting to think about the various clients we worked with. I think you could probably put them on a scale, and some were the high end of a 1 to 10. I would say they were audience-centric because they really did pay close attention to their audiences, and in particular today, I think we're mostly thinking about prospective students, and they were constantly thinking of ways to learn more about their prospects, and our job was to come up with new, sometimes and innovative ways to do that research. But clearly there were just some clients who were always thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned new ways of finding out what their audiences are doing. Can you give me a little bit more about what are the best ways to keep tabs on the audience behaviors, motivation, wants, needs, etc.? I mean, you see it in every report that comes out, specifically with digital, how quickly trends are changing and how behaviors are changing. How do you keep track of that?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
No, you go ahead, please.
You can tell we've worked together for a long time. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a never-ending challenge, in truth. But in our work, we would use a variety of methods, and that could involve survey research or it could involve interviews or focus groups. I think one thing we did that was innovative, and the world is changing so much, and the world of social media is changing so much, but is we were constantly pressured to get further and further upstream with prospects, and we had a project where we had prospects very early on in the process before they perhaps even knew they were prospects, keeping diaries. But I think that the truth is there are just many different ways to approach this, and probably need to constantly be thinking about the best way to learn about your audience.
Yeah, I would just second that, and I'd also say that to Bill's point about the constant change in the constituents or the audiences, I think it's important to lots of times we would do a one-off study where we want to understand these prospects, so we'll do a survey one time to just get a better sense of what's going on. But at the end of the day, the prospect pool changes so much that whether it's every year, maybe not every year, but some sort of constant monitoring of what's going on, how your brand is perceived, what prospects want and need, is important to understand, because if you're only doing it, if there's huge gaps in the time between researching, so many things change, it's really hard to piece that out. So kind of some sort of a frequent monitoring is very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about the little trends that I see in our prospective students, where we hold Facebook chats all the time with our deans of admissions, but it's interesting to see the amount of response coming from these people who are saying they're creating a Facebook page just to get into the chat, versus where just a few years ago that was the go-to because that everyone had one. And so it's kind of interesting to see that how the age to get different accounts is changing, or they're not getting them at all.
Absolutely. Yep.
So are there short-term and long-term strategies when it comes to these audience and the research that you do with them?
Well, I guess it would depend primarily on the client and their objectives. Like I mentioned, there are one-off studies where the client may just need one specific research question answered. However, long-term strategies could include things like tracking studies where we're tracking the student or the prospect experience, the application process, ways to make that the admissions process better, and stuff like that. So that could be a long-term strategy where the client is actually going to use those findings to inform, how they make changes to the enrollment or admissions process, how they change their campus visit days, all sorts of things. So I think a long-term strategy could be using that research to constantly tweak and refine how they're engaging with these audiences. It could also be that, with ongoing research, they can modify the research so that they can deep dive into specific areas. If there's a finding that a certain, for example, a certain process in their enrollment or their admissions process isn't satisfactory to students, they can tweak that, modify it, and then do further follow-up questions or follow-up research to see if those changes have made a difference. So it kind of depends on the client, but I think at the end of the day, it's kind of we would use our background experience to kind of shape those research questions, but then it's also great if the client is willing to kind of think outside the box and kind of actually use the research to improve their processes.
I would add one thing to that in thinking about what Mike said, which is really a nice summary. I do think that it's valuable to do truly exploratory research, because as Mike was pointing out, you can track your prospects over time with surveys. I think the problem is you might fool yourself into thinking you know everything, and if you do occasionally at least, and we would do this exploratory research where you're really much more having an open-ended conversation, you may learn about things that you never thought to ask. And I'm thinking of, for example, without revealing clients, we worked for a lot of MBA programs, and I remember learning about sources like Poets and Quants, which is a pretty critical source of information that we'd never asked on a survey, but it suddenly came up in conversation. So I think doing that exploratory research, at least occasionally, can be really helpful.
Yeah, I was just reading the 2015 Pew social media report that they did, and they showed how the questions have changed since they started the survey in 2005. And so you see the questions just even at 2005 starting like, well, are you on MySpace and Friendster? And over the timeline, it changes to, okay, well, are you on Facebook, Instagram, or any other social media? So it's not even just changing with the time, it's also opening up, because by the time someone gets that in front of them, there could be some other thing that they're on that when this was created wasn't active or being used as much. So it's just really, exploratory is, I think, one of my favorite things, because it's just, I guess as I get older and out of touch with my application process, I think, okay, well, what could they possibly be doing now, and where are they now, and making sure that I'm in touch with where they're at and how to get in touch with them.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that, 'cause I was just speaking with Bill about the same thing, because I said, you know, there's research actually done by Chegg, one of the sponsors, and it's about prospective students and how admissions folks are reaching out to them and how many different channels there are. And I was telling Bill, I'm like, even when I applied for college, like an admissions person would have never called me, like cold called me, or they wouldn't have been trying to contact me through social media, all sorts of things. So it's just, it's very interesting how things have changed and how many different channels there are that, you know, admissions people are reaching out to students. That is quite different even in the last 10, 15 years.
It is, and yet, and I have 3 children. 2 are older, and they've been through college, and 1 is soon going to be entering. And I'm still struck at all the materials that get sent, you know, the hard copy materials, which seem not very effective. So it is interesting to see that the world is constantly changing, and yet some practices don't change.
No, definitely. I have a little brother who just graduated high school in May of 2015, and the amount of mail that he still got was just insane. I couldn't believe it. It was just, I was like, I can't believe this still is that much mail is coming to you. And joke's on them, because sadly he already had his school picked and figured out what he was going to do. And so you think, I'm like, oh my goodness, I just know. Like, I mean, it's pennies comparatively, but how much they're spending to get this student who's already decided and way down his path. So what information about prospective students, speaking of that and how quickly they change, what do you see that's true kind of across the board? Are there any universal characteristics to them, to this audience in particular?
Yeah, you know, and I think we have to be a little careful, because we're going to recognize that we have an audience in higher ed that's quite varied, from, you know, community colleges to 4-year institutions to professional schools. So, but still, I think there are some. Mike and I were chatting about this before this. There are some universal findings that probably cross all of those subpopulations, and one is that prospective students are looking for the objective voice. I mentioned Poets and Quants as an example, or College Confidential. They want to hear the truth from something they think is objective. Current students are always that, you know, having that kind of contact. What strikes me as a constant to this day is the campus visit. You know, coming to campus. In some cases, there isn't a campus in the virtual world, but when there is, that remains important to this day. And you know, people ask about rankings. I think what Mike and I found is that when it comes to rankings, they of course matter, but it really does depend. You know, an example would be if someone's applying to the very best MBA programs, that the difference between a ranking of 2nd and 5th is huge. But if you're applying to a law school and you're using rankings, and you know that your target is, say, in the 50 to 100 range, then rankings are very different. You use them at the beginning to kind of identify where you might want to apply, but the difference between 55th and 58th is not. So that really varies. And I think I'll turn it over to Mike, because we did a lot of work on website redesigns. I know that's something dear to M. Stoner's heart as well, and found some things there.
Yeah, I would just point, yeah, other information we know on prospects. I think actually, or you could say not enough information is known, is as we're mentioning the importance of social media. I think that's just having a huge impact on how students are engaging with colleges or universities or programs they might apply to. And on the other side, how admissions people are reaching out to them. I'm co-sponsoring my own survey on what's called social selling, which is where this is primarily for MBA programs, but I'm sure it's going across the board. But this is where admissions people are actually using their own Facebook, LinkedIn accounts to reach out and communicate with people, prospects, whether they're answering questions or engaging in a dialogue. And it's, the question is, does your program have policies on this? Is it working? Why do you do this? Why would you not do this? So it's just interesting to see that the level of engagement and all those different channels that are being used there it's really changed in the last couple of years. I also think with prospects, something we know about but maybe don't know enough about is the ways in which they're being influenced in their decision, whether it's their parents, whether it's their friends. They'll say in surveys that these groups or these people have an influence, but at the end of the day, it's kind of understanding how much of an influence it's having and why. I think would be interesting to know more about.
I think so, definitely. That leads me really well into my next question is, what do we know about parents? I mean, we do see those surveys and the research that comes back that parents are an influential piece of a student making a decision on a school, but what do we know about that audience and marketing or reaching out to them so that they are getting our message that XYZ school is a great place to get an education to their students at home?
My initial reaction to that is we don't know as much as we should about parents, and I'm struck, Mike, in thinking about the work that we did, how infrequently parents were actually included in the research, although there is research out there. I think one of the more interesting projects in just a couple of years ago was more for a new program, and we actually did research parents, and it was interesting to get the different perspective from parents, which could be quite different. And this was a new program for students going on to a master's, kind of a professional training. So I guess my main reaction is we probably know a lot less than we should know about parents.
I would completely agree, and I think based on some other research I've seen from Chegg actually and some other places is that it seems like the level of parental involvement is fairly high in terms of they will suggest schools or programs they want their kids to apply to, or obviously taking them on these campus visits a lot. But at the end of the day, I think the percentage is actually smaller who are actually saying I'm directing my child in a certain way, or I'm telling them where to apply. Is kind of more of a hand-holding, helping, trying to guide their decision rather than make it for them. But that again leads to follow-up questions like how impactful is this, or what kind of impact is the parent having on the decision, and how are different prospects steered more by parents versus others, and all sorts of things that we probably don't know enough about.
Mm-hmm. Are you starting to see a trend in more and more people looking to learn more about parents, or is that still something that it doesn't seem to have kind of caught up yet with being a really pivotal audience to spend time with?
That's a good question.
I can't really say that I've seen that trend, and it seems like we've been talking about helicopter parents for a long time, so this is not new. I was also going to say, what's also a little tricky about parents is that they are kind of a gatekeeping audience. We did have a project that was more in K through 12, where we thought about the fact that the students were coming from low-income families, or for college it could be first generation, and that adds, I think, another twist to the research, where you talking to high school counselors and even teachers can be those can be important audiences.
That was actually another question that kind of just came into my head, was that I've been looking at creating kind of digital portfolios to kind of hand, or not hand out, but be accessible to counselors at high schools and stuff like that, things that they can bring and just have on their computer to show to students as they come in and pique an interest and say like, oh, well, here's a list of our programs, or just like kind of a digital media kit for these counselors who see students all the time, and things that they can easily shoot out in an email versus maybe print materials, which I think has been more. I remember getting print materials from my counselor, and it kind of just ending up in the bottom of my book bag with every other piece of paper that I was going through that day with. But so counselors, I think, are that other side of the piece. And have you guys seen any work being done with them, or is that kind of, again, on the frontier of what's next and where we should be looking?
No, I think it's done somewhat, but again, I think there's so much more that could be done. So many opportunities that aren't being taken.
So you touched on it a little bit earlier, but what do you guys recommend as being how often do you think research should be done? Should it be like a regular occurrence every so many years? Is there little things in between that kind of buy the time until you do a whole new research set, or what's kind of the perfect mix, you think?
I'm going to have Mike answer that, because I mean that as a compliment. I think he has always been very good about not doing research for research's sake. So I defer to Mike as the initial answer.
Thank you. I guess the easiest answer is it depends. I think, as we spoke before, I think it depends what the strategy is, what a client is after. You know, there's tracking studies that we've done to monitor all sorts of experiences or satisfaction that admits or prospects or even alumni have with an institution. A lot of people in higher ed clients who want to make sure that certain metrics, quote unquote metrics, are being met. Are our alumni or prospects or admits satisfied enough, etc. There's also things that come up, whether it's a website redesign that needs to be looked at, and you know, they're changing the website, but they want to make sure that they're changing in a way that appeals to the prospects or the admitted students. So that could be something that just happens one time, but is very informative. So yeah, I really think it's just always making sure that we, as the consultants or the researchers, are adding value to what needs to be done, and helping them sort out what questions they're trying to answer and where they're trying to take something, rather than doing research for research's sake, as Bill said. So,
just for fun.
Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Bill?
Well, what I've learned from you and our experiences is that it's probably true that should always be doing some research, but not getting caught in doing and being kind of creative.
No, that's a good answer, because I am a numbers person, so I'm always looking to see what my audience is looking for, where they're at, or what they're doing. So I'm constantly always doing little things on my own where I'm reading the latest research that comes out from someone else, and I'm just seeing consistently if it's creeping on the people who are, I don't know, favoriting a tweet or engaging on a social media post or something, and just seeing generally each time what that group looks like and who they are and what they're doing. And so that's a good thing, because I could totally see myself just sitting there and getting engrossed in research and asking questions and asking another question and getting as much information as I could, and it might not being as helpful as I might think it is. So
I also think our research can help, bridge the gap between what the client already knows or thinks they know, especially if they're using metrics or, all admissions folks are using a lot of analytics, such as tracking their admitted student scores and so forth. But at the end of the day, if you're getting higher and higher, say, GMAT scores, that's a great thing, and that means your reputation is stronger and so forth. But at the end of the day, someone with a 750 GMAT is much different than someone with a 600 GMAT. So it's understanding, okay, now that we're getting higher scoring students and so forth. What does that mean, and what is it that they want versus these other admits want and so forth. So it's kind of bridging that gap between what you know based on the numbers and then what the prospects or the admits are telling you. So.
That's a good answer. Good thing to keep in mind. And so when this research is conducted, who should receive it? Is it just admissions office? Should it go to communications office all the way to student life? Who is the, I guess, audience of the audience research?
I mean, you listed some good audiences. I think my hunch is that the really thoughtful universities and colleges are engaging across a variety of internal audiences, because what's happening in admissions is going to impact student life, is going to impact eventually alumni affairs, and it's all kind of integrated. And I think places that get that really tend to look at students as a part of a continuous life cycle, and so they involve more people. You sit around the table with admissions, but student life, and maybe even alumni affairs folks. I think that's the ideal, as opposed to just admissions because it's prospects.
That's a good answer. Do you have anything to add, Mike, or was that a...
That pretty much summed it up, actually.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you kind of looked like you had a thought. But and so, obviously, if you want to share the reports, which I think it is an awesome idea, but how do you filter out that information so that they're not getting a giant list of just numbers and information that might not even be relevant to what they're looking for? What's the best way to kind of filter this, or to build out reports that are actually helpful to these different parties that you want to include in the end result?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I will say that if you have helped the client shape the research objectives, you have a pretty good sense of what they're expecting. Mm-hmm. In terms of telling. It's interesting you use the word filter, because yes, you're filtering information because you're not sharing everything. But I kind of look at it more as like a distilling process, or kind of a storytelling. Mm-hmm. You're kind of pulling it, because some clients do want to see everything. They want every data split, every number, everything they could possibly want, which is fine. But at the end of the day, I think our role is to kind of tell them what's important, or what is interesting, or what they can change. And I think any good researcher is also going to go like one step beyond and take a look at the data. And there could be an example of, say you have a university that's downtown, so that the applicants who live downtown are different from those who are in the suburbs, and they're different from those 3 states away. The client may already know that, but at the end of the day, it's our job to actually look at that and say, well, we found that we looked at this by geography and we found all sorts of interesting things, and then writing that up for them. So you may be informing them of things they didn't even know about. I think that's one role of the consultant or the researcher. I personally actually have gotten more in the role of just asking what they expect, actually, like in terms of the actual deliverable, because some really respond well to a certain way of presenting the data, while others wouldn't, whether it's PowerPoint or a Word document or data tables. It completely depends on the client and what they're after. So I actually have gotten more in the habit of asking ahead of time and saying, like, this is how I think this is the best way to show this. Do you agree with that? I think it's actually worked quite well. So, do you have anything to add, Bill?
Well, I think one thing that you were a champion of, have been a champion. If a client's nervous, give them his background, all the data, lots and lots of tables, etc., that they can get through at some point. But in the end, what they really should get is the critical findings. And really, as Mike said, if you've worked with them closely and you know what their issues are, then you should be able to be pretty succinct in some sort of a report that can tell a story. I think that's the way that Mike put it that makes the most sense. You need to be able to tell the story, but some people certainly want all the data in case they want to dig for something that they didn't think of.
Yeah, every time I try to do a metrics report, I try to attach it to something, whether it's our key messages, whether it's a campaign that we were running, showing really creating kind of who the person is, or here's what exactly happened, because I feel like that creates such an easier concept to grasp than just saying like, okay, well, 37 people liked or shared this post. Well, okay, what does that mean? Well, 37 people wanted to share it with their audiences themselves. And so I like the concept, and I love the trend of that, where it's just, okay, show people why these numbers matter. It's not just throwing, okay, we had X amount of thousands of people click on this link. Okay, well, that's great, but what does that mean for me at the end of the day? I love that. I think that's so valuable. I kind of have a little
Absolutely.
bit...
Yeah, I think providing that context, right? Providing that context just makes it so much not only more interesting, but it actually makes people understand what the findings mean. So.
Yeah. That's so valuable to me, because it just, I mean, I'm a numbers person, but I'm not a math person, if that makes sense. So if I can't do the adding together or the all the different equations, but if you tell me what this number means in stories created by people or people that are creating moments or something, I'm much quicker to understand what that means and be able to apply it to what I'm doing day to day. Another question that I just thought of is, so you mentioned people typically knowing what they're looking for. How do you kind of find the questions that you don't know to ask? So, for instance, if a school was set on thinking that their students are from these 3 areas, how do they expand past that to look for the students or that group of people that they might just be missing because they don't realize that audience exists or that style exists or something like that?
You know, I'm glad you asked that, because it sort of fits with something else I thought we should talk about, which is, what do we mean by prospects? And sometimes you could define prospects as test takers who fit a certain set of criteria, but then you've already limited your prospects, and sometimes it might be inquiries. But I think your question really is one of how do we find out what we don't even think to ask, or there are groups of prospects that we're not asking, and that's tricky. I think we're sometimes challenged to do that, and there are ways to do that, but it's always easier to deal with a defined group of, these are the inquiries or these are the test takers. But I do think we were pushed at times to try to get out of that box, and I think that could be critical. Because it's very likely that a lot of institutions have prospects that they haven't even thought about and studied.
And but that just makes it more difficult sometimes, because then you have a pool of people, and it's a question of like, well, how many are like legitimate prospects? How many are likely to apply to this program or school? And then at the end of the day, it's like, well, you can only, then it's more a question of drafting the right research or survey questions to make sure you're able to look at those different groups, like high likelihood of applying or possible versus not at all. Otherwise, you'll just have a pool of people, and you won't be able to dissect what's going on there.
That's really interesting to me, because I'm always concerned that I'm missing something or not asking the right question to find this whole new section of potential people or new ways to reach people. And so I'm always like trying to think, how do I get them to tell me more about what they're doing and what they're and about themselves, so that I can better serve that. And if it means that they're not interested, then it means it's not interested, and I'm not putting time and campaigning behind reaching that student or that group of people that might not be interested.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there are 2 issues there. I mean, the one is the audience coverage. Do you have it covered well? And then the other is, are you asking the right questions? And I think that maybe gets back to the exploratory research as a way to kind of keep yourself honest, make sure you are open to new kinds of questions and issues.
So we've talked a bit about research and stuff, and kind of setting it up really professionally and very with a process. What can I do in like my day-to-day stuff that kind of helps me get a better picture of what my audience looks like? Are there small things that I can be watching for or doing that helps me track what they're doing and where they're at?
I think your question might get us into the realm of more real-time data on prospects, which we also haven't talked about. But there's a lot going on in social media, a lot of conversations, and I think some researchers are starting to tap into that. But that, I suspect, is a new frontier that's going to evolve.
Yeah, that's one of my nerd things that I love to do is I love to watch Google Analytics in the real time. Yours is on it. That's really embarrassing to admit, but I really like watching what they're doing and seeing what they're. It's just really cool to watch as someone moves through the site or moves through what I sent them to and seeing what actually resonates and what they just kind of blow right past. That's all for questions that I have today. I've asked a couple of extra ones that have come in, but do you guys have anything else you'd like to add or anything you think we should cover before we sign off?
Other than it'd be great to do this in 5 years and see how much everything has changed. I suspect it will surprise us.
We might not even be doing it via Google Hangout anymore. It could be like, I don't know.
Right.
Holograms or
something.
Yep. But I just want to thank you guys so much for joining me. I love, like I said, I'm a numbers person, so I love learning this kind and hearing this kind of stuff from experts in the field. And if you guys have any other further questions, feel free to tweet the Higher Ed Live hashtag. I'll be on for a little bit longer, and I can send you some resources. But thank you, as always, to our program sponsors, Chegg and Stoner, and thank you to Mike and Bill for joining me today. This will be available archived in just a little bit on higheredlive.com and podcast. I'm Erin Supinka, signing off.